afternoon to you all. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here in your midst, although on a distance. It will be strange presenting, not seeing you directly, but I'll do my best. My name is Rien Rouw, but don't worry about any pronunciation. I'm working as a strategic advisor at the Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, as an advisor in the what we call knowledge department of the ministry, and this knowledge department supports policymakers with scientific evidence and with strategy. So this is my daily job in the ministry, and I've been involved in curriculum reform as a knowledge advisor to the team that is responsible for the curriculum reform, and it has been going on for a long time. And I was involved in different stages of this process. But next to that, I've always been working for the OECD, and I've done some research on curriculum reforms in other countries. So what I'm telling you this afternoon is based on my experiences in the Netherlands, but also in part on my research on implementation processes and policy implementation processes in different countries. Can we go to the next slide? So this will be the content of my presentation. I first will tell you something about the Dutch education system in general, to maybe to get an understanding of why we're doing things as the way we are doing them. Then secondly, I will tell you some history about the curriculum revision process from 2014 until 2021. And then in the last part, I will tell you something about current developments, and that will be mainly about the themes that are also in the heading of this of this lecture on your agenda. I have called it direction and flexibility, but you can also call it stable structures and flexibility. Those things are closely connected, I think, and not necessarily contradictory to each other. Can we move to the next slide? And then move one further, please. So just very shortly, this is a picture of our education system. And the only thing that you need to remember is that our secondary education is really segmented. So we have primary education, and at the age of 12, pupils choose between 3 streams: the pre-university education, senior general secondary education, or they go to pre-vocational secondary education. And in pre-vocational secondary education, the segmentation goes further, because there you can choose between 4 streams of vocational education. So we have a very diversified system to develop curricula for. The next slide, please. Now, to understand our system, you need some background, some historical background, and this is a famous article in the Netherlands. This is Article 23 of our Constitution, and that stipulates the freedom of education. And that means the freedom to establish schools, the freedom for parents to establish schools, new schools, the freedom of choice for parents, so they can choose schools that align with their convictions and orientations, but also the freedom for teachers and school boards within those schools to choose their own curriculum, to develop their own materials, all aligned to their philosophical or pedagogical orientations. But there's an interesting thing in Article 23, because the first paragraph states, education is an object of persistent attention of the government. So Article 23 is about the freedom, autonomy, if you wish, but also about direction and guidance from the government for education, for schools. And you could say that we are always in a kind of balancing game, reinterpreting exactly the balance between the things the government is doing in education and the autonomy of schools and teachers. That balance is reinterpreted every now and then, negotiated every now and then. But we have both these two angles in our education laws. And it has resulted in a dual system of public schools and what I call publicly financed but privately governed schools. And that means that these schools are headed by a board. They used to be chosen by the parents. They were a member of an association, but nowadays, mostly these are foundations. And we still have public schools, but many of them also turn into this second feature, this publicly financed but privately governed schools. The real public schools, the board of those schools is the municipality council. But as I said, that is changing now. The next slide, please. Just to give you some figures to get an idea of how big or how small our system is. So you see around 3.5 million, almost, what is it? Something like 3 million pupils in primary and secondary education, including special education. You see around almost 300,000 teachers, what we're talking about. Then the number of schools, so 6,000 in primary, 600 and somewhat in secondary education. And the last figure that you see in that list is the number of school boards. So now 900, it's 916 now in primary education, around 300 school boards in secondary education. And those school boards are really important. They are responsible for the education and for the quality of education in their schools within the frameworks and guidance of the government. And we move to the next slide. So in the curriculum landscape, it might be good to know that these are the key players in that in our system. So we have the ministry, then we have a National Education Council, a strategic council for education policy, and they also gave advice on what is necessary to change in curricula, but in a strategic way, so in a long-term way. We have a very strong inspectorate of education, specifically in primary and secondary education, and they, you could say, look into the realization of the curriculum. So what do pupils actually learn in schools? Is the curriculum effective? Then we have SLO, the National Curriculum Developer, an agency for curriculum development, supporting schools in translating the very broad core attainment goals of the national level to school curricula. School can use all kinds of templates and formats SLO is developing. Then we have the National Examination Agency that is responsible for the quality of central examination and for tests at the end of primary education. They also certify providers of those tests in primary education, because in primary education, at the end of primary education, every pupil needs to take a test, but there are different providers. And the CVTA, the National Examination Agency, is deciding upon which providers can enter the system. At the end of secondary education, we have central examinations. Many of them are developed by the test developers, CITO, also an important player in our system. And then we have, since 2020, I think 2019, a scientific curriculum committee, a temporary scientific committee, and that is guiding us with scientific advice in the last phase in this phase of the curriculum revision process. So that's about the key players. Can we move to the next slide? And then we move to part 2, a brief history of the curriculum revision process from 2014 to 2021. The next slide. So this is where we come from. We had core objectives, core attainment targets in primary education, and a different set in lower secondary education, both dating from around 2006. Now here you see some characteristics of those core objectives. They express aims, so goals to strive for, rather than goals to attain. They are really general statements about what children should know and be able to. And then there is, for literacy and numeracy, since 2010, we have additional reference levels, as we call them. And those are really concrete attainment levels for students in primary and secondary education. And then in upper secondary education, we have another system. The curriculum is based on examination programs, as we call them. So those examination programs made by SLO contain all the materials, all the content you need to succeed in the examination. And that is done by subject. So this is our start. This is the starting point of the curriculum process in 2014. And since we haven't changed anything, this is still the current system. But we wanted to change that in 2014. Let's move to the next slide. These are some examples of those core objectives. So you can see here that these are really general statements about the aims for children. So the pupils learn about linguistic principles and rules. Leaves a lot of room for schools. And that is one of the problems. And I think that's also on the next slide. So why did we decide to renew our curriculum? And one of the first reasons is to create more curriculum awareness, ownership and competences among teachers, and less dependence on publishers. Because what we noticed was that since we have such broad and rather vague attainment target statements, it left a lot of room for the publishers, or it left a lot of room for schools to fill that in, to translate it to a school-owned curriculum. But that room was actually, in many cases, taken by publishers. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to change the curriculum and the way it is designed. Now, then there was the general urgence to update the curriculum with skills for the knowledge economy, as it was in 2014 formulated. Also, the existing curriculum felt overloaded, and we had a lack of coherence, both horizontally, so between all the subjects or learning areas, but also vertically, between education sectors. And then particularly since around 2019, we also want to change the curriculum because we are performing less, we are performing worse in, particularly, you see that in PISA, but also in other tests. And there were also concerns about civic and citizenship skills and attitudes. So those were reasons that came around in 2019, around that period. let's move to the next slide. So here you see very broadly the curriculum revision process, and actually you could distinguish three phases. It started in 2014 with a program that was called Education 2032, and that was headed by an expert committee. There was a really broad consultation of all kinds of stakeholders, including teachers, school leaders, but also students, parents, societal organizations. Everyone could talk about what was needed in the new curriculum. And the discourse was mainly about what I said from the learning economy. So what skills are needed for a learning and knowledge economy? Then the second phase started in 2017. People were not really satisfied with the result of the first phase, and then we started in 2017 with a kind of with a new way of developing a curriculum, and that was teacher-led. So there were teams of teachers, school leaders, and a few experts who developed for 9 learning areas, as it was called, building blocks for a new curriculum as a basis for the attainment targets to be developed later. So that was highly teacher-led, and what also was interesting in this exercise of curriculum now, as the literal translation is that it was a combination of primary education and lower secondary education. So those teams were made of teachers both from primary and lower secondary education. And then in 2020-21, we started a new phase, you could say, that is the step-by-step approach, which I will present in the next part of my presentation, but which is also where a scientific committee is guiding also the development of those new core attainment goals. Can we move to the next slide? So now we're coming to the last part of my presentation, which is about the current process that we are now in the midst of. And I'm going to tell you a few things, a step-by-step approach, the careful implementation, and then preparing for implementation and realization. Next slide, please. Maybe, so what did we learn from in 2019 and 2020 about the process we had until then? So from 2014 with the expert-led, and then the building blocks exercise with teacher-led teams, we've learned actually two things, two observations, that we had to move from a kind of grand design or a big picture approach, so the whole of the curriculum, to a step-by-step approach. That was the first thing we learned. And the second thing we learned is that we needed to turn curriculum revision from a kind of one-off exercise, or you could also call it a disruptive exercise, to a matter of routine. It needs to be grounded in normal procedures that are happening every now and then. And it needs to be predictable. That is what we learned from in 2019 from the process we had until then. So this is directly based on the first lesson. What we now have implemented is a step-by-step approach. We start with, in primary and lower secondary education, with core objectives for the basic skills. In 2022, we have started basic skills for literacy, numeracy, citizenship, and digital literacy are also basic skills now. Those are new. We used to say literacy and numeracy are the basic skills, but in 2020 we have deliberately also taken citizenship and this digital literacy in our program of basic skills. And then now we have just written a letter to Parliament where we have announced that the progress of the development of this of the core attainment targets is going according plan, and we start with other subjects, start with other domains as well, in primary and lower secondary. And then in the other part of education, the upper secondary, where we work with examination programs, we also take a step-by-step approach, starting with the most urgent revisions, and that is based on a routine process. We have done that more often. It was not all too often, but this is a process where teachers are involved, and we know that process. And we start with Dutch, the modern foreign languages, mathematics and natural sciences. And in the course of 2020 and 2023, we will add other subjects as well. So this is the step-by-step approach. And then the next slide, trying to turn it into a routine. So we also have made, the scientific committee has also invested a lot of time in design requirements for a new curriculum, kind of framework that functions as the start of the development of all those subject-based or domain-based core attainment targets. And talking about direction and flexibility, I want to point to two design requirements, and that are the last two. So the core objectives are concrete, and that's what we want now. They need to be more concrete than the ones we developed in 2006 to give more guidance to schools and teachers to translate it into their own lessons, and to give them more ownership of the curriculum and less dependence on publishers. And then the flexibility, you see that particularly in the last design requirement, that the time for teaching core objectives will add up to 70% of total teaching time. So those are all the core objectives, not only those from the basic skills, but all the core objectives. And the rest of the time is for the school to decide on their own school priorities. That's at least the idea we had when we developed the design requirements. So there is both direction and there is flexibility, rooms for school to adjust curricula, to make curricula really fit in their own context. And the next slide, please. We also aim for a careful implementation of the core objectives. We have a design phase from 2022. It just started until 2025. And then there will be decided if the new core objectives will be regulated, will be put into law. And then we still have another phase of gradually building up and step by step, subject by subject, of domain by domain, implementing it. And then in 2029, it should be completed for all subjects and for all schools. In 2023, we have a lot of pilots and also professional development for teachers. And also in the period after the decision is on the new core objectives is taken, we still have a lot of professional development planned to really make teachers and school leaders acquainted with the new core attainment targets. So this is also a kind of, this makes it predictable, but it is also room for flexibility. In the pilots, things can be changed. So there's always this balance between direction, stability, and flexibility. The next slide, please. And what we've just written to Parliament, I think it was 2 weeks ago, this was a proposal on a curriculum maintenance system. We didn't have that, but we desperately needed it, and that's why we made this proposal to Parliament. And the aim is to go towards a systematic, predictable, and transparent process of curriculum revision. And it will be based, this revision, on an every 10 years strategic advice on future directives of the Education Council. Then we want to establish a new organization, a council for the curriculum, or an agency for the curriculum, you could call it. And that agency will translate that strategic advice into a concrete plan for what it means for the curriculum, what needs to change, how and when. And one of the things that this Council for the Curriculum will make is what we call a maintenance calendar. So a calendar where the steps in revisions are, where again, this step-by-step approach is taken. So not a whole revision at one time, but carefully planning for which subject, which domain needs to be revised or when. That's in the maintenance calendar. What we're also now thinking about is a good monitoring system, because we have a lot of information, but it is fragmented, and we need this new Council for the Curriculum or Agency for the Curriculum will also play a role in organizing all the information we need about the need for curriculum revision, the way the curriculum is realized, how performance is related to the curriculum. So all what you need, the satisfaction of particularly teachers with the new curriculum. So all that information, we're going to develop a plan for how to bring it together and relate it to the work of this new Council for the Curriculum. And this Council for the Curriculum is composed of teachers, school leaders, curriculum experts, assessment experts. They will all be together in that curriculum agency. The next slide. And then, what particularly important is that flexibility or autonomy requires competences at the school level. So that was one of the reasons why we started the whole curriculum revision process, to create more ownership of the curriculum within schools among teachers. But also capacity building is needed then, and we have there are several things we are doing. So around the design process, many teachers are involved. There are design teams with teachers, pilot schools where the attainment targets will be tried. There are advisory groups and regional meetings, and all those groups develop also capacity in curriculum and making of curricula. Then we have a specific policy program for basic subjects, so to strengthen the performance in the basic skills. And we have an agreement with social partners to arrange extra time for teachers for training and development in the basic skills. So that will be developed and further arranged now. And then we also fund associations of teachers to provide professional development to teachers, particularly oriented at curriculum, capacity and curriculum awareness. And as we all know, and it has been said several times this day, as I heard, this is one of the most important things. You could call it professional development. I might prefer sense-making. A sense-making process. The new curriculum really needs to make sense for teachers. They need to be involved in the making of, but they also need all the capacities to translate it to their own classrooms. So that is now maybe the most important challenge of revisioning the curriculum in the Netherlands and all over the world, I think. Thank you very much for your attention.